I know you guys are excited. Are you ready for this? Guys, that was not enough energy. Are you ready for this? Okay, I know this.
But let's talk about the future. So we've hit 100K. Took us, I guess, 15 years. Where are we going to be in 10 to 15 years from now?
I think we're going to see a lot more use cases right now. So right now, people still view Bitcoin as an investment asset to a large extent. So people talk about price. People talk about 100K. People look at it as an asset type or investment asset. It's really the utility that I think we will see in the next decade or decade and a half. So I think it's a future of money. So it should be used as a utility. So I think later on we shouldn't be calling Bitcoin. It's just money. So I think people like is it Bill Gates who said like people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but underestimate what they can do in 10 years. So I think within 10 years or so, 5-10 years, we're now seeing nation states accumulating Bitcoin and as strategic reserves, and that will increase the price further potentially, and that almost mathematically. And then we will see more use cases out of it.
Okay, so you avoided the question, but what's going to be the price of Bitcoin in 10 to 15 years?
To the moon.
I'm putting you on the spot. You got to give me a number. What would you say to your friend?
I think really there's no limit really.
Above 1 million?
I don't want to make any specific predictions.
What about the number of users? How many users do you think will be using Bitcoin in 10 to 15 years?
So I think in a few years we will reach more mainstream adoption. Where we will reach 50-70% of the population. We're probably never going to reach 100% of the population until like 20-30 years later, because there's an older generation that may, my mom doesn't really know how to use cell phones very well, right? So I think it will take a few generations to reach 100% adoption.
When I think about what should the price of Bitcoin be, I really have a hard time making the case that it should be worth anything less than parity with gold, which would be, I think, a $16 trillion market cap.
I think it should be way more than that, because as you said, it has many advantages over gold. And gold is not a limited asset. People control the supply of gold by now mining it, but there's a lot more. And we don't know how much they are. And with Bitcoin, we know exactly how secure it is, and there's not a whole lot left.
You heard it here, folks. Bitcoin should be way larger than gold, $16 trillion market cap. I think that's like $850,000 Bitcoin? That's the floor. That's the floor. Okay, so let's talk nation states. You saw that the United States should be doing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. What's your reaction to that?
It's fantastic. I think finally we are seeing smart leadership. But it's very smart for the U.S. to be doing this, and this also have a knock-on effect to other countries in the world. If the U.S. is doing this, then every other country will happy. So I think it's fantastic.
If you had to give the elevator pitch to a country, 60 seconds in an elevator with the head of, what would be the pitch that you make?
I would say it's like you want the future of money, right? So if you care about your money, then you should care about the future technology for money. This is the future money. If you don't want it, then you're gonna be poor in the future. So I think that's a pretty simple pitch.
So, I'm not saying anything that hasn't already been publicly said, but, one of the driving motivations, amongst many, for President Trump to embrace Bitcoin is he wanted to ensure that America was dominant, and that America didn't cede the market or the opportunity to China. China is the elephant in the room on where their Bitcoin position is. There's lots of sites out there that say China holds, I think, 190,000 Bitcoins. How do you think China reacts to America's change in policy? What should China be doing? Will they do that? What's the mood in China on Bitcoin today?
I think China is a bit harder to predict. I think China is less transparent in terms of what the policies are and what they do behind the scenes, in terms of what assets are they accumulating or not accumulating. So far, there's no news about Chinese government accumulating Bitcoin right now. But it's not to say that there's some department that could buy it are not buying, right? So far, there's not been so much public information. I think there's a lot. Trump has not got in office yet, and the strategic Bitcoin reserve has not been activated yet. So I think as soon as that actually happens, we will see what other countries do. So I think the other countries, because they don't have this sort of democracy debate thing going on, they're less telepathing their intentions. Where some countries like UAE, they have always been pro-crypto. So they already have a Bitcoin reserve. They've been mining Bitcoin. Bhutan has been mining Bitcoin. Other countries, they're pretty public about it. I think China so far, based on my information, there's been less information. But so far, they have not opened up crypto exchange registrations. There's no regulatory framework right now. But at the same time, though, China can move really, really fast when they want. So this is the difference between a democracy and a sort of aligned leader, like powerful leadership, where when the top leader says go this way, there's no debate. Whereas the U.S. have to go through this debate process back and forth. Luckily, we're now on the right side of the debate.
I thought it was interesting. As soon as the United States approved the Bitcoin ETF, within I think 3 months, Hong Kong approved Bitcoin ETF. Do you have any opinion or perspective on what to make of that? How would you read that situation?
I think China's quite smart in the sense that they want to use Hong Kong as the sandbox for crypto to see how it works. And Hong Kong has some competition with Singapore, so they always want to up each other in terms of how pro innovation they are, in terms of attracting talent, etc. There's also a drain in terms of funding talent from Hong Kong during COVID period. So now Hong Kong has to work really hard to attract those people back. And Singapore has benefited quite a bit from COVID. In Asia, quite a lot of rich guys from China went to Singapore. Singapore, though now, because it's a financial leader in Asia, it's actually quite conservative in terms of crypto regulation. I think Singapore was pro-crypto like 3-4 years ago, but then certain things happened. Like sovereign fund investing in the FTX, that didn't go well. So they're a bit more cautious right now. But we're seeing that competition happening still. Hong Kong is a test bed, but I think Hong Kong's regulation is still somewhat restrictive in terms of number of coins exchanges can list. Japan went through that. 7 years ago, Japan approved exchange registrations, but they had a very strict limit on what coins can be listed on the exchange. Because of that, 7 years ago, in 2017, when we first started, if you look at the world's top 10 exchanges, 5 of them are Japanese. Now a few years later, they were not in the top 100. So now they're changing the regulations again. They open up the listing framework. So Hong Kong still have the restrictive listing framework, just as a simple example. So I think over time, Hong Kong will catch up. Will realize that that's not enough to attract business. When I spoke with some regulators here, they mentioned, look, if you make a framework, the key is not just the benchmark is not to say, hey, how strict we are. It's to say, hey, does anybody come? Right? If you make a framework that's super strict and you don't get any business, then the framework doesn't help you. So as any regulator, your job is not to block everything. It's to encourage economic growth in a healthy way. So that's a benchmark. So I think Hong Kong, though, because it's a kind of viewed as a China sandbox, you can change quickly. I think Hong Kong has some advantages. Yeah.
What do you think the likelihood is that there is a strategic Bitcoin reserve in Hong Kong? Because we've heard rumors and rumblings of that happening. Is that something that is realistic to happen within that sandbox type environment?
My guess is, given the sort of Asian Chinese mentality, they will probably do much quietly. So the Asian mentality is we hoard money quietly for as long as possible without telling people. It's just a very different culture mentality. So I'd be shocked if they announce something and then do it. I mean, I'll be much less surprised if they accumulate and then announce.
But I'm saying, you think it's a plausible thing that they would establish one?
I think it's inevitable. I mean, they have to do it at some point because it's the only hard asset.
So, when you're talking to a country, and I imagine over your history at Binance, you've talked to many countries. I'd love to hear if there's any stories that you can share. But, what are the biggest impediments? Like, make the case why you wouldn't embrace Bitcoin or own Bitcoin in your reserves?
I think, there was this false concept or misunderstood fear about Bitcoin is disruptive. Crypto is disruptive traditional financial industries, to banks, to payment service providers. But that's completely not true. The banks should adopt this new technology. Otherwise, if they don't adopt it, it's disruptive to them. So when there's a better way to do things, and if you don't use it and just try to ignore it, then you will disrupt yourself. You'll become irrelevant over a period of time. And that innovation is going to happen regardless. So I think that's the wrong mentality that people have, which is a fear that many people have. And the other misconceptions of crypto is used for money laundering, etc. If you look at the percentage of illicit transactions in crypto, it's actually much smaller than in traditional finance. Whereas crypto is like completely traceable, it's actually more transparent, it's easier to track, and the tools are getting way better. And whereas in traditional financial institutions, you have to look at isolated data pools in banks in different countries, etc. It's actually much harder to track. So I think the people are starting to understand these misconceptions. Crypto is a superior technology for money. It is a superior technology for, transactions. So I think all of this is happening. And for the people who are in doubt, now Mr. Trump probably fixed most of the doubt. Thanks to you, probably.
So, I know for a fact that there are multiple countries in this room right now that are considering establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. What would be your advice to them in terms of how to think about, controlling your own private keys as a sovereign nation, and the sovereign, truly being in control of your assets? How should they think about it? Should they be building their own custody solutions instead of using vendors? Is it appropriate to use companies to build this infrastructure? Like, how do they start?
I think most countries or organizations, they will start with a third-party solution first. And it might be a third-party custodian solution, means that the custodians hold the private keys. And then as they learn, and also as the size of reserves increase, they will look at multi-sig solutions. They will look at self-hosting. They will look at open source solutions. So ultimately, the best solutions are open source, self-custody, and multi-signature, right? Or threshold signature with multiple signers, etc. So I think they will acquire all of this technologies, tools, and also know-how over a period of time, hopefully in sync with the increase of their reserves. All of this technology is available. So Binance has it, many other industry players has it. Everyone's happy to provide it. So I think from day one, you don't have to go full self-custody. You're probably going to lose it because you don't have the operational know-how. And people lose the biggest reason people lose their coins is they lose their keys, right? So you can lose your keys, you can lose your keys to a hacker, etc. But over time, I think nation states will develop their solutions to do self-custody, and I think that's the way to go.
I've had, over the past month, like people reaching out with the most kind of unique edge cases to consider that I've never thought about before. And one is, if you're a country like El Salvador, which was very forward-thinking and has quite a nice Bitcoin stack that they've built, at some point in time, if the Bitcoin becomes valuable enough, the attack vector is like, how do we get Bitcoin if we're Guatemala? And I'm just using this as a hypothetical. We invade El Salvador and we take their private keys. Okay, so how does a nation think adversarial about for some of these countries will in theory become trillions of dollars in value? Ensure that can't just be targeted and attacked.
I think actually the best way to sort of hold a large amount of crypto is to use multiple signers in different parts of the world, right? So the signers for El Salvador's Bitcoin reserve doesn't have to all be in El Salvador. They should actually be geographically spread out all around the world. And only a very few small number of people should know who they are. I think the president should not know who they are. President Nayib should not know who they are. Just like when I used to run Binance, I don't know who the signers are. Specifically, I'm not one, and I don't know who they are. So if people ask me, I just can't help it. And the more money you're dealing with, the more signers you are. You can go 4 out of 7, 5 out of 7, 13 out of 15. But you don't want to get the denominator and the denominator too close, because then if you guys are missing, then you can't sign transactions. So 13 out of 15 is probably a bad example, but maybe 9 out of 15, right? So so you can continually increase the number of people, and the people themselves shouldn't know who they are. You only need 1 or 2 or 3 people to know who all the people are to do the multi-sig.
It introduces an interesting idea for the future of trade agreements, where maybe you have an ally. It's like, we want you to hold one of our keys to our Bitcoin wallet in case we get invaded. We can go to your country and recover it.
No, all you have to do is the key signer can be a citizen of your country but lives in a different country, right? So and nobody knows that guy. No, that guy can have a regular job, embassy or not in an embassy. Who knows?
Sure. So talk about, you've worked with a lot of governments. When you've worked with them, can you speak to which ones have maybe leaned the hardest into Bitcoin, and what was the process by which they found success? And I'm thinking of specifically, and I don't know if you can share this story, like the Kingdom of Bhutan. Like, how did that happen?
I think, well, Bhutan is quite unique in the sense that they have a lot of extra clean power. It's on the side of the mountain. It's kept high in the Himalayas. So they have a lot of hydro power. They only use 30% of the electricity they generate. So they have access. And selling electricity is hard. You have to transport them over distances, you have laws, etc. And then when Bitcoin came along, it's very natural for them to say, hey, why don't we convert this extra electricity into Bitcoin? And then it's permanent storage, easy to transport, and goes up in value, etc. So they started Bitcoin mining way early. It's just the geography of the country and the natural resources available. And then once they start, things, Bitcoin, they started, I don't know, 10 years ago, right? So
who pitched them though? Like, I mean, there's lots of countries that have a similar, dynamic of like we have excess energy.
Yeah. I think it's Wu Jihan.
Wow.
So big man, and then now big deer. So I think he was there way early. So that's the information I have. So he has I've seen his farm there for the mining farm. It's quite impressive.
Gian, if you hear this, good job. Well done, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
So let's talk Bitcoin mining for a moment, because I feel like Bitcoin mining is the gateway drug to the strategic Bitcoin reserve. I'm hearing about countries, it seems like almost everywhere, that are now doing large-scale pilot programs of Bitcoin mining. I'm actually hard-pressed to think of a country that doesn't have some sort of mining initiative going on. Can you talk about the development of that? How much experience you had at Binance on that front? The case made for doing that?
Yeah, so honestly, I don't have a lot of experience in mining. I hear about it just from the industry perspective and from a country perspective. Different countries have different advantages when it comes to mining. Well, first of all, mining is usually a cheaper way to get Bitcoin if you're patient and you want to get them at scale. Mining is no longer doable as a retail exercise. If you just want to do mining yourself, it just doesn't work. You won't get the best chips. You won't get them in time. You won't have the economy of scale. It just doesn't work. You won't get the cheap electricity. So mining needs to be done at scale. But if you can do it at scale and if you can do it efficiently, my understanding is that yes, you can get Bitcoin cheaper than buying them on the exchange. But there's a lot of volatility risk, because when you got to invest now, and the coins you get is like a year or two later, right? So and you have to control your costs, you have to have negotiation power, etc. But for the guys who do it well, they get it. They get it at a cheaper price. Some countries have extra power, like Bhutan, like here. Some countries have cheap power, like here. Other countries have a better cooling systems. They get early access to chips. So different countries have different advantages. But if you want to buy a large number of Bitcoin over a period of time and you're patient, like most nation states are, then mining is a decent option. But mining is operation heavy. So this is why I have never really done, in 2013, I tried to get a KNC miner. I don't know if you guys they were the first 28 nanometer.
The Jupiter or the Saturn?
I forgot what it was, but I got it. You shipped 2 months later than you promised. By the time I got it, turned it on, it doesn't make sense. I tried it. It's like an Air 747 in my apartment, and just doesn't work. So, but mining is a good way for nation states to get Bitcoin. So I know quite a lot of different countries are doing it.
Talk about how you see the geopolitics of Bitcoin. I mean, it's interesting. Russia made comments recently. Putin made comments recently about, you can't ban Bitcoin. You can't stop Bitcoin, I think is the quote. There's a lot of countries that are embracing Bitcoin. Some that are closely allied with the United States, and some that are not. Do you have any perspective on how that will play out?
Yeah, I think most countries will first try to ban Bitcoin. I think that happened in the last decade, including the last administration in the U.S. And they tried to really push hard against the Bitcoin crypto businesses. And then they will realize that that doesn't work. Bitcoin price keeps going up because more and more people understand that it's a hard asset, and it's a digital asset with no boundaries, and there's no way to ban it. So and then people turn around and say, look, we gotta adopt it. So I think it doesn't matter if you're friendly to the U.S. or not. That doesn't matter. It's just the nature of the asset and the nature of the technology is there. You have to get onto it. Now you can hate a country, but you can't hate the internet. Without the internet, you're less efficient. Without the blockchain, your money system is less efficient. So you can't fight that. You can't fight efficiency just because that's separate from nation states. So I think Putin's recognized one. You can't ban it. I think most countries are still kind of in this transition period because countries react slowly. Even though there's an election that happened about a month ago, but it still takes time for the changes to propagate. But I think over the next few months or years, we will see a very strong transition in terms of the attitudes from nation states that adopt this technology.
So if you were sitting with Donald Trump right now, President-elect Donald Trump, I should say, what would be your advice to him in council? And what do you think he should do to kind of fulfill his goal of making America the Bitcoin superpower?
I think there's roughly like 3 big steps. I think number one is you want to stop regulation by enforcement. So I would recommend drop all the non-fraud lawsuits. So all this registration failures, all this security versus not security, I think all of that should go.
So I think this is my last question I have for you, but are you familiar with the term hyper-Bitcoinization?
A little bit, yeah.
So hyper-Bitcoinization is basically the concept of universal adoption of Bitcoin, that every company in the world will own Bitcoin, every person in the world will own Bitcoin, and every nation state in the world will own Bitcoin. Do you subscribe to that view?
I think it's definitely going that direction. But a lot of things could happen in the future. There could be a better version of a Bitcoin. But right now, I don't see anything on the horizon. I think there's some designs in Bitcoin that nobody can replicate. I think one of the fundamental designs, the founders, nobody knows who he is. So that makes it more decentralized. The community is like a really open community. So there's no one really in charge. So there's some fundamental concept that is really, really hard for somebody else to replicate right now.
Well, I want to say, from when I first met you, you have a lot more gray hair. Thank you for everything you've done for Bitcoin. Thank you for the struggle and surviving and thriving.